I stood frozen in the pitch-black corner of the garage, fingers trembling as I loaded the final bullet into the revolver's cylinder. The cold steel felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a weight not of metal, but of the absolute finality it represented. Through the cracked door leading into the house, my wife Emma's voice drifted toward me, light, playful, and completely unbothered. She was pacing the kitchen tile, the soft clink of her wineglass echoing through the empty hallway. She casually told her lover, Robert, that if they were going to keep seeing each other, he'd have to start using protection because she was planning to have a baby with me. The laugh that followed didn't belong to her. It was deeper, rougher, soaked in absolute mockery. Robert chuckled at the thought of me unknowingly raising his child, calling me a clueless idiot. Emma giggled right along with him, claiming I was far too oblivious to ever notice, adding the brutal jab that I was completely incapable of satisfying her in bed anyway. Every word sliced through me like a razor, destroying years of marriage in a matter of seconds. I had spent the entire afternoon setting up a quiet romantic dinner to fix whatever distant gap had grown between us. Instead, I was standing in the shadows holding a loaded weapon, discovering that my life was nothing more than a cruel joke to the woman I loved. My mind raced back over the last few years, replaying every sacrifice I had made for our future. Every late night spent at the office, every weekend I threw into building a stable life for us. It was all built on a foundation of absolute lies. I looked down at the gun in my hand, my knuckles white, struggling to pull breathing room into my lungs. The sheer absurdity of it made my stomach turn. She wasn't just stepping out on our marriage, she was actively plotting to use me as a financial screen and a surrogate father for another man's child. I had to force my jaw shut to keep from screaming right there in the dark. The house I had worked so hard to buy felt like an alien vault, cold and hostile. I carefully placed the revolver on the workbench beside me, forcing my fingers to unclench one by one, knowing that if I walked through that kitchen door with a gun in my hand right now, my life would be completely over. As I set the weapon down to steady my pulse, a sharp, heavy knock rattled the front entrance. The laughter instantly died. Emma's heels clicked rapidly against the hardwood as she hurried toward the foyer while I snatched the revolver back up and slipped down the hallway, keeping my back pressed flat against the wall. Standing inside our living room was Detective Wallace, an old acquaintance from the local precinct. He explained that he was investigating a massive financial fraud operation linked to illegal offshore accounts, and Emma's name was right at the center of the paper trail. Stepping directly out of the dark, I demanded to know what was happening. Emma spun around with a venomous glare, accusing me of being emotionally absent and claiming my total ignorance was the real reason our lives were falling apart. But Wallace cut right through her defensive outburst, insisting that both Emma and Robert step outside to be taken down to the station for formal questioning. As they were led out into the night, Wallace turned to me with a grim warning, "Get my affairs in order immediately, because this was going to turn incredibly ugly." Left alone in the suffocating silence of the empty house, my phone buzzed violently on the coffee table, with a call from an unknown number. I snatched it up, hearing Emma's breathless, frantic voice through the speaker. She begged me not to listen to anything Wallace said, desperately warning me, never under any circumstances, to check our joint bank accounts before the call abruptly disconnected. Driven by instant suspicion, I ran straight to my study and logged into our bank portal. Buried deep beneath routine mortgage payments was a hidden account masked under fake consulting fees. Over $250,000 had been systematically siphoned off into an offshore shell company over the past year alone. As pure rage blinded my vision, slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the floorboards outside the study door. I raised the revolver, stepping out into the hall, only for Robert to casually lean against the wall, having walked straight through my unlocked front door. He looked right at the barrel aimed at his chest, arrogantly informing me that Emma was done with me, warning me to sign the divorce papers quietly and stop digging into the money if I wanted to walk away from this house alive. I stood there, finger resting on the heavy trigger, every muscle in my body screaming at me to take the shot and end the disrespect right then and there. But Robert just smirked, taunting my hesitation, calling me soft, before turning his back on me and strolling casually out the front door, as if he owned the property. The moment the heavy oak door slammed shut, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. Desperate for real help, I called my old college friend Mark, a top-tier criminal defense attorney who knew how to handle high-stakes corporate disputes. He arrived at my house just past midnight, carrying a briefcase and a fresh mug of coffee. Mark examined the digital transfer records line by line, his face growing darker with every passing minute. He confirmed that while marital asset theft gave us massive leverage in divorce court, we needed concrete paper trails to uncover the entire scope of the scheme before Emma and her partner could wipe the servers clean. The very next morning, a cryptic text message from an unlisted number summoned me to a rundown local diner on the outskirts of town. I drove out through the grey morning light, finding Emma sitting in the back corner booth, her eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out by absolute panic. She practically begged me to pack my bags, abandon the house, and drop the entire legal investigation, warning me that Robert was far more dangerous than I could ever comprehend. She began to confess that the money was never meant for a divorce, but before she could elaborate, a sudden rifle shot shattered the diner window beside us. We hit the floor as heavy gunfire tore through the metal frame of the booth overhead, showering us in glass and debris. Chaos erupted around us as panicked customers scrambled for the emergency exits. Through the spider-webbed glass of the front window, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a hooded gunman sprinting toward a black sedan before it tore off down the highway at full speed. Police squad cars flooded the parking lot within minutes, their sirens echoing off the surrounding hills. Detective Harris pulled me aside into an intact booth for an immediate interrogation. When I dropped Robert's name and described his appearance, Harris's expression darkened instantly. He revealed that Robert Hale was no mere lover or low-level scammer, or high-level operative embedded within an international weapons trafficking and money laundering syndicate. Emma's offshore accounts weren't just a personal getaway fund, they were being actively used to clean illicit criminal cash, and my forged signature had been stamped onto several critical wire transfer documents to frame me as the primary fall guy for the entire cartel operation. Released hours later from the police station, I received another breathless call from Emma. She wept through the speaker, confessing that she had completely ruined everything and that Robert's enforcers were actively hunting her down to silence her permanently before the line dead-ended once more. Mark and I spent the remainder of the night locked inside his legal office, frantically tracing Emma's digital footprint through encrypted networks and offshore servers. We managed to follow her last automated wire transfer to a domestic holding account held under a fake identity, paired with a cell tower ping from a burner phone located at the isolated Red Pine Motel, 2 hours deep into the dark, densely wooded countryside. I returned home briefly to gather my thoughts and pack a bag, only to be ambushed in my own dark living room by Robert himself. He held me at gunpoint, his demeanor icy, as he demanded to know where Emma was hiding the physical access keys to the accounts. I swore on my life that I didn't know her location. He tossed a piece of paper with his cell number onto the coffee table, threatening to execute me on the spot if I spoke to her without alerting him first, before fading back out into the night. With no other alternative left on the table, I grabbed my loaded revolver, slipped into my car, and drove through the thick, blinding fog toward the woods. The Red Pine Motel was decaying, surrounded by towering pines under an ink-black sky, with only a single flickering light glowing from a corner room on the ground floor. Heart hammering violently against my ribs, I crept across the gravel lot, reached the door, and pushed it open. Emma was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress, clutching a duffel bag stuffed with wrapped stacks of $100 bills, staring at me in total shock. But before either of us could utter a single word, the heavy silence of the room was shattered by the distinct, metallic rack of a handgun directly behind the back of my neck. Robert stepped out from the deep shadows behind the doorframe, a cold, triumphant grin plastered across his face. He thanked me with a mocking laugh for leading him straight to the money and the final loose end he needed to erase from the board. Emma screamed, pulling her knees to her chest, but Robert racked his slide again, aiming the heavy black barrel directly between my eyes. In that split second, the months of humiliation, rage, and calculated betrayal crystallized into pure survival instinct. Instead of begging for my life, I lunged sideways, whipping my own concealed revolver out from my jacket pocket. A deafening gunshot echoed through the cramped motel room, blowing out the bedside lamp and plunging us into total, terrifying darkness. Muzzle flashes illuminated the small room in brief, violent bursts as I fired blind toward his shadow. The thunderous bangs echoed off the thin walls until my cylinder clicked empty. When the heavy smoke cleared and the suffocating silence returned, Robert collapsed heavily onto the floorboards, completely motionless, his weapon sliding harmlessly away across the linoleum. Emma sat frozen in the corner, sobbing hysterically, reaching her trembling hands out to me for comfort and protection. But as I stood over them in the dark, holding the smoking revolver, I looked down at her face and realized the frightened woman before me was the exact same person who had laughingly traded my life away for criminal cash. Without saying a single word, I reached down, grabbed the heavy duffel bag of money, stepped directly over Robert's body, and walked out into the cold night air alone, leaving her behind in the dark to face the arriving police and the wrath of the syndicate on her own.